Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Grant. I'm your host for this evening's webinar, and you're in for a real treat tonight. With me is Steve Glazer. You may have heard he and I going through some technical setups in the last few minutes, but thank you so much for joining us. It's 7:30 here on the east coast of the continent, but for some of you it may well be early or late afternoon, and for those of you further afield, late at night or even morning on the other side of the planet. But for wherever you're from, thank you so much for joining us. As I say, you are in for a treat. And let me, before I introduce our presenter, Steve Glazer, let me just give you a sense of how the next hour will progress. In a moment or two, I will turn it over to Steve after introducing him, and he will speak for 25 to 30 minutes. No doubt asking you questions along the way, and then we'll turn it over to the sort of formal question period. But you don't need to wait to ask a question of Steve or myself, or alert me if you're having technical difficulties. That chat box, the chat box, which some of you may already be familiar with, is in the bottom left-hand corner. And to ask a question, you simply type into the horizontal empty box to the right of where it says main room, type your question or comment, and hit enter on your keyboard, and that will propel your comment up into the box. So feel free to do that, both in response to comments or questions that Steve asked, but also comments and questions that other participants ask. Feel free to respond to any and all of those. So that's how and then at the very end, at the 60-minute mark, I will ask your indulgence to respond to a quick questionnaire. What did you like about the webinar? What could have been better? What have you participated in other webinars before? And those of you who indulge me in filling out the survey will be eligible to win a free digital subscription to Green Teacher magazine. And speaking of Green Teacher, this is we've been now doing these webinars for a couple of years. And during that time, we continue to publish our quarterly magazine for youth educators. And at the last 10 years, we've had the pleasure of publishing 6 books with articles that originally appeared in the magazine, but which were rewritten for the books. So without ado, let me tell you a little bit about Steve Glazer. I had the pleasure of working with Steve a few years back when he wrote really what I thought was one of the most exciting articles that I had seen in many years on the topic of this evening's webinar. And there he is there. He is really a pioneer in the field of treasure hunts, of questing, and has since gone on to publish a wonderful book that was, in fact, a couple of books, that both of which have been well reviewed in Green Teacher magazine. And since we first started working together, I've seen Steve's name pop up doing workshops all over North America, and we've run into each other at conferences. In so doing, he's really brought this quite innovative place-based education strategy to so many communities around the world. And I was delighted when we were doing a practice session earlier today to hear just how many places now that Steve's aware of that are now doing community treasure hunts. But I'll let him tell you a little bit more about it. Let me just say that he's been helping schools and parks and communities connect people with the places they live. He's the author of the books The Heart of Learning. He's the editor of Valley Quest, 89 Treasure Hunts, and Valley Quest 2, 75 More Treasure Hunts. He also co-edited the best of Valley Quest, Treasure Hunts to Special Place, and he's the co-author with Delia Clark of Questing, a guide to creating community treasure hunts that was published in 2004 by the University Press of New England. He continues to direct the award-winning Valley Quest program in New England. He's been doing that for 10 years and consults internationally with groups interested in developing questing and other place education programs. In addition, he serves on the faculties of Antioch New England Graduate School and the Center for Whole Communities. and we'll make sure you've got all his contact information at the end of his presentation. Steve, I'm so delighted that you accepted the invitation, and over to you for your presentation.
Well, thank you. So I'm Steve, and my wife says that I'm a place-based educator. My children say I'm a professional treasure hunt maker. And either way, it's about making connections, connecting people to places, connecting schools to communities, and trying to ground concepts and curriculum in physical, actual places, the places where they unfold and you can really see them. So there's me. I'm in Vermont. I invite you to tell us where you are, and I can let some of you know where across electronic and physical space our group is from. Eleanor, where are you from? Sounding far away. Pennsylvania. We got someone from Pennsylvania, from Vermont, from Ottawa, Florida, Carol, Megan from Colorado, Vancouver, BC. So we're all over, New York, North Carolina. So Valley Quest, treasure hunts in our particular place. Those are some of the places that you are. And what exactly is a quest? Have any of you been on a quest before, or perhaps made a quest? Either yourself or with a group of students? No. Does geocaching count? Wonderful question. Questing is the grandparent of geocaching, and so yes, it does count. No. So what is a quest? A quest is really a treasure hunt to a treasure in your community that is hiding there. Some people see it, many people don't see it. They don't know how to see it, they don't know how to find it. So how do you guide someone to find it? A group creates a treasure hunt. That group could be a third grade, could be a fifth grade, high school student. The treasure hunts have various formats, but essentially they include clues, visual, literary, directional, which guide people along an adventure, and then clues which teach, which tell the pieces of the story as folks find them. Here's an example of a quest which goes to Beaver Pond. And so here, the quest is to something that's hiding there and illustrating the pieces, the patterns, the processes that show how beaver habitat works. Quests might also...
Steve, I'm good. It's Tim here. I'm just going to jump in. I asked people if your voice is a bit quiet, and I asked a question in the chat box, and several people said that they're not hearing you very well. So if you could either move your microphone closer and speak up, that would probably help us.
How about this? I'm now holding it right in front of my mouth and just using one earpiece. Is that better?
That looks great. That's great. Sorry to trouble you with this, but that's much better.
Everyone says better, so I will do it. So then there are cultural places. Here's a class in front of an old mill site in a forest. There might be industrial sites in your community. There might be places where particular people lived. But in general, it's taking that place, adopting it with a group, creating a vehicle as a service project, which takes someone to some place they had never been. An act of generosity, an act of treasure finding, an act of gifting story. So it's hard to make one if you've never been on one. So I would like to take you on one And this quest exists on one sheet of paper. What you make might be one page, it might be a bifold, trifold, small publication, but it's how much space it takes your group to tell its story. The illustrative piece might be a map, it might be a treasure map, it might be illustrations. Again, that depends upon the story that you'd like to tell. So let's go on the miraculous tree quest. Every quest has a starting point. Before you lead someone on a wild goose chase, they have to be able to find that first place. Often you give them driving directions, an address, a GPS point. What are we looking for? Wide, stretching arms. Here we go. Ah, in back, the white oak. We might not know it's a white oak by eye, but using the teaching clue. My family is oak. My color is white. A cousin stands next to me on the right. The verse piece of the treasure hunt will vary with you as a teacher determining what level of language arts challenge you want. Will this be in couplets? Will this be in stanza? Is it enough to write complete sentences? In terms of the interpretive piece, how deep do you want your quest to be? Here, we're looking at trees. We're moving from tree to tree, headed towards our miraculous tree. A lot of people can ID trees by their leaves. It's another thing to begin to look at bark. And as a way of creating intimacy with bark, this quest between each movement clue has the participants measuring, as did the students, the diameter at breast height. And actually, in doing that, one has to step really close, touch, measure, and that in that interaction, a piece of learning happens. I don't know how many of you have taught or used DBH before. Anyone out there? Diameter at breast height. No? We got a yes from Mike. 2 yeses, nope, so about 50%. So in the construction behind this quest, the visitor is moving from tree to tree, but actually the students as well moved from tree to tree doing measurement, and now they are guiding you along a route that they've established. So movement clue, moving through space to our next place. And as you do movement clues, you turn on, you can tell someone where to go, but if you invite them to find something, it turns on a visual faculty, which really starts to turn on the whole world around them. So much better with your clue to invite somebody to find something, look for something, and tell them exactly where to go. So here we are, departing the cemetery, moving to the road. Mast producing zone, a fancy way of saying let's call this place home. A lot of people ask, does the quest have to be in rhyme? Does it have to be in verse? It doesn't have to. It depends on your goal as a teacher or with your group. But an important thing that the verse does is it's sticky. It makes it a little more fun to read. Also, as a participant composing verse, if I ask you to write a verse about mast, and I ask you to write 3 facts about mast, compacting it into that verse might make it stay longer in your mind. We move along, and I'll just have you read these slides in your mind. It's important to know that for the creator, this is a writing activity as well as an investigation, as well as service. But for the person who's going out, it definitely has a read aloud quality. So most people, when they go in groups, they take turns reading those clues aloud. We approach now the second bead, as it were, in our chain, a tall hemlock. We might not know the hemlock, but locating it, geolocating it with a pole makes it pretty clear. Add the name, and then in collecting DBH, the participant, the student, moves close to the bark, practices again that skill, and sees how is this like or not like that white oak. We keep going, learning about the dominant trees of the northern hardwood forest, which is the general terrain of this quest, but really focusing on teaching that skill with just a few select trees and learning to see differences. Again, we might not know yellow birch, but we could find it at 675. And I think there's a smile when the number becomes a mailbox and the old yellow birch moves into sight. Not like the hemlock, not like the oak, and along we go. The amount of text you use will really vary. Also, the length of the quest might vary. Some variables are how much distance it takes to tell your story, how much distance you can cover with your group in the amount of time you have to work, getting out from your classroom to the site, the field session, coming back, and also the factor of, does your group work better pairs, trios, individually? Class of 16 working better in pairs, you might end up with 8 beads on your quest. Or within this framework, 8 trees that they move through. So we keep going along. Does it look like a yellow birch? Does it look like a white oak? Does it look like a hemlock? No. Up close measuring it, we might befriend the white ash tree. So we've collected a number of measurements which partially serve as an interactive. They also will serve as distance, which will help us find a treasure. And I have a question come in. Do the groups quest at the same time, or do we divide them? Good question. Usually when you're making a quest, you'll take your domain, you'll investigate it, you'll find the story you'll want to tell, and then you break that story into pieces, which with each smaller group developing general knowledge of the whole, but mastery of a part. In terms of going on it, if it's a small group, people can go on it all at once. In terms of doing a quest with a large group, it definitely helps to break them up and with separate start times so people move out of distance and they're all engaged with that learning experience. But generally, it's created at that level of class, and it's gone on at that unit of family or grouping of family. And again, with larger school groups, I break them up into small groups with staggered start times. Looking closer at trees we see along the way. People might know an apple tree by its apples, but it's a different thing to know it by those row of sucker holes. So again, we might not know white birch, but we might know 3, and we might see them uphill, and we're getting closer to where we're going. Here we go. The first glimpse of our miraculous tree. There's its general shape, form, and on the right there are the leaves. Anybody have an idea out there what this miraculous tree is and why it would be miraculous? Why we might send a group to it? Mike says chestnut. He's hit the nail on the head, a mature, a century-old American chestnut. Do any of you have those out in your community? Carol says no. Mike says, wish we did. No, too cold. Ditto. So in fact, very, very few people these days will get to see a mature American chestnut in their lifetime. So to find one takes this place that was private and makes it public. And in teaching them to find this tree, they learn also how to see trees more generally. So pretending we didn't know what it was, we get to the base, we add up those diameter and breast heights, we get a sum, and then we look for our treasure box. And there it is, actually, at the base of those 3 white birch, and you can imagine the excitement of looking for that hidden treasure. And I like to call this the fake treasure. Though people went on this journey to find this box, the real treasure was already hiding there. They just didn't know it was there or have the invitation to see it. So what goes in the box? One thing that will go in the box is a sign-in book, so visitors can let us know they were there. There is a rubber stamp that gets carved with a symbol for that site. And then the additional things are what you think will share your story. And so up there on the top is a one-page narrative of the history of the chestnut blight and the fact that in the eastern United States, 1 out of 4 trees in the hardwood forest was an American chestnut. And that's not true anymore. So the quest, that place was there. A group adopts that place as a learning site. That site gets studied in the first phase. In the second phase, gets parsed out into a narrative or a story. In the next phase, small groups take each piece of that story and create product, text, image, and then the booklet or the product gets put together and a service sent out to the community, brings publication, first the children to their parents, then extra copies for their relatives, then out into the community via newspaper, via school newsletter, magazines. So one quest example. So some questions for you. What is your community? Mine, the Upper Valley. Within your community, what are the special places? A question came in. In distance, how long does it take to complete? We did a survey with users, and people's preference is for about a 30 to 60-minute experience. Shorter than that isn't enough, and often after an hour, the guided experience becomes too long. Fewer people will do it because they can't commit that time or the physical distance is too challenging. So we actually have 3 or 4 hour quests, but the most popular are in that 30 to 60-minute length. So then within your community, what are special places? Those special places might be special like the chestnut because of their unique qualities. They also might be special because they're the best place out in the community to teach your content rather than inside of the classroom. Some people know those stories, some don't, so it also creates an opportunity for partnership with elders of the community, with specialists in the community. So now you know what a quest is. How quests get used really varies. It's used a lot by upper elementary classrooms as a way of integrating language arts and social studies, language arts and science, and engaging in service learning using the community as classroom. It's also used a lot by parks. Non-formal educators will create these to interpret the landscape of parks, of arboretums. Land trusts will also use these as adventures which link different properties. And one resource for creating is Questing, a guide to creating community treasures. The book goes through the steps of finding a site, reading the landscape, developing a strategy, how to work with groups in the field, the writing process, the artistic process, the publishing process. It says, I can see it being used by all grade levels. It definitely can. One of the reasons why it's most popular at upper elementary is developmentally it's appropriate. Kids first, second, and third grade love questing. They can be very engaged in it. They might not be able to write product of the value for full wide community publication. Fourth, fifth, sixth, they can start to do it. Plus in upper elementary, the school day is more yours. A lot of middle school teachers will use this. It's harder for them to grab the full school day. So instead of using this in an interdisciplinary fashion, it becomes thematic. Here's a way to see immigration. Here's a way to see the American Civil War. Much more finely tuned process. On my website, there's lots of links to various groups, various models. I wanted you to see, if you go to my website, to publications, there are two full sets of lesson plans. One is Watershed Quest. It's 8 lessons plus a pre and a post assessment. This works to teach watersheds, but really you can also use it with any natural history-based quest with some small adaptations. Secondary levels, definitely, yes. Very little resistance from teenagers because it's actually quite a fun process. I've had high school students create these also, and college students do them for classes in things like environmental science. And most popular ones in middle school are using it as a Civil War inquiry. You can learn about the Civil War certainly in your classroom. Those teenagers are much more engaged hunting in a cemetery for the stones of veterans, and they can't help but in some sense be excited when they find an actual person. And then as one moves into the data collection from that stone, as you can see with this form, there's an opportunity for connection through name, through place, through date. Oh, that person was born on the date of my brother's birthday. So there's lots of ways of creating very physical bonding with place, which I think is really compelling. So there's natural history model online. There's a cultural history model online. And then I've been experimenting with this idea of Civil War cache. Now, a geocache, one finds a hidden point in space, then one finds a box, and then in that box you take something and leave something. This is more of a virtual cache where students will adopt a place, they collect the GPS point, they create a web page of the information they've learned about it, they attach that to a QR code, they laminate the QR code and put it out on site, and then one can move through space looking for a point, find the hidden treasure, and then if there's a signal there, open up and read student-produced narrative right in that place where history happened. So this is a more higher tech version I'm working with. Valley Quest website has a number of examples, and even though maybe none of you are in Vermont, New Hampshire, if you go on here, you can see models. What does this look like when it's made by second grade, 7th grade, 11th grade, a college sophomore? So all of the creators are there, as well as the content-based. And some questions. What are the size of classes groups? I've worked with classes of anywhere from 10 or 12 to 30. With those 30 size, I usually break them, depending on their age level, their pairs or trios to create a quest with 10 to 15 points. You might not then be able to get all of the students through all of those points in their learning process, but they have parallel process of all doing a certain number of site investigations, all geolocating, all creating movement clue, all creating teaching clue. So some groups will do identical process, others parallel process. My website is there. Now you know who I am. And besides the publications link, you can also see there are programs in Ohio, in Maine, in Massachusetts, in Oregon, California, Poland, Hungary. So there might be a place nearby where you can go, or you might look at their sites and be inspired to replicate that kind of scale of program in your community. And we're about halfway through our time, as promised, and I'd love to see the second half be question-driven. What are your
Thank
questions?
you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. That was terrific. And I'm sorry, you may have noticed I disappeared about 5 times. Somehow I was the one having the audio problems. But in any case, as Steve said, yes, you can see on the screen, and many of you, of course, have been with us in previous webinars, so you know what to do. But for others, if you can now type a question or comment into the box on the screen and hit it, that will bring you back to a blank screen again. And in case you have a second question you want to ask Steve, feel free to of course, type that second question in and hit submit again. I have while people are doing that, Steve, I've got a couple of questions that came up, and I'm picking up on a couple of comments in the chat box too. You spoke earlier about that the size of a group would be determined by the size of the class that participates in a quest, if it's a school group. But I think you said you also break them into sort of smaller groups and send them out at different intervals. And then, at the other hand, you also mentioned that sometimes it's family groups that are doing the quest. Can you say a little bit more about the size and diversity of groups that you've worked with?
Sure. I've made a quest in a day with a small group. I've made many, many quests as a weekend workshop over 2 or 3 days with anywhere between half a dozen 32 people, where over that course of time, we all learn how to make one at the same time as we make one together. And then working with classes, I would say a minimum of 4 sessions to produce a quest, and probably better is 2 to 3 times that, 8 to 12 sessions. That 12 kind of being lessons of 45 minutes to an hour. Eleanor asks, how many times do you take the group out? You definitely need to take them out twice, because in some sense it's unfair to teach what you're only just beginning to know. So at least the first time going out for a nice, deep experience of investigation, and maybe even if you went out for a few hours or a half day, at the second half of that time, writing what you learned or drafting what you learned earlier in the day. And then if you could only go back one more time, the time you would go back is for ground truthing what you've written, for testing and editing and polishing. Because it's not service learning if what you make misguides people and they get lost. So I think it takes twice minimum to get to know something and then to refine it. Certainly more field visits is better.
Steve, we've got lots of interesting questions coming in. One just off the top is, what got you interested in questing in the first place?
Very interesting. There's a long and a short and a medium answer. If you go to my website and you write me an email and say you want the long answer, I'll give it. But the short answer really is I took a course when I was in college called the Industrial Archaeology of Great Britain. And we basically, after the beginning of the class, abandoned the classroom and went out looking at industrial sites. And small student groups adopted sites, learned about them, and shared them. And so I learned about bathstone mining, and I found an old mine, and I met someone who took us down and gave us a tour. We followed the rock from the entry down old railway. We found a century-old piece of rail in the forest, got down to dried out abandoned canal locks, and followed the locks through backyards into town. And so that learning by doing and learning to see visual landscape analysis just totally captivated me. And I wanted to get kids outside. I'm a kid who needed to learn by doing. Short answer.
No, it's a good answer, and you've pointed people to where they can find the long one too, so that's great. Someone else asked, so you've divided up the groups and they've headed out. How do each of the groups know that they've gotten to the final point, or if you're leading us with a group and they've got, let's say, the printed page like the one you put up for the Ellie quest many slides ago?
Sure. Well,
are they asking you questions along the way?
Let's look at the Ellie quest. The ending point determined where the quest was going to end. So we wanted to get people to the chestnut. So then the question was, where was the place to start? Well, that chestnut's actually on private property, and so we had to move back along the road to a public venue that people could find and park at to get out of their car. So really the end determined the length by the link between the ending point and the beginning point. And sort of the world totally supported us by having that beautiful white oak, which is miraculous in its own right, at that starting point. And then between those two trees, and wanting to focus about trees, we looked for major specimens when we were planning out the unit. So it was a number of trees which the students went to, and they made sketches. They made bark rubbings. they measured DBH, they filled out data collection forms. That was really the first visit. And then going back after doing some research in the classroom was writing drafts of the movement clues, writing drafts of the teaching clues, then going back in the classroom again and editing it, then coming back for testing. So you have to really, the driving force, if you're a classroom teacher, is your curriculum. So if I want to teach habitats and adaptations, and I don't have bus money, I look at my school, what various habitats, if any, can I find within walking distance of my school? I might find a lawn. I might find an old field. I might find an edge. I might find a little bit of a riparian corridor. So then I see 4 different habitats I can use without a bus. So those become my outdoor classrooms. Maybe we go out to 2 of those places one day. We go back to 2 of those places another day. And now they've started to have an experience of those places. So now we have people connected to place. Now that they've visited that place, we think, where's the best place to start? We ask the group, where's the best place to end? Generally, the school is the best place to start because that's where they started, and there's a place to park. And then the end might often be the place they really love the most. Once they have a beginning and an end, they can establish a route. Once you have a route of point A, B, C, D, E, F, then you job it out. Okay, who wants to go flagpole to lawn? That's group A. Lawn to field, that's group B. Field to edge, group C. Edge to riparian, group D. They've all been through all of them. They all have some basis because of their experience. Now they become specialists. And that small group, their job is, you need to get me a movement clue to it, a teaching clue about it, a point on the map, and some kind of visual location support, kind of at minimum. You could grow it, certainly. I need a species. I need a page of a field guide from everyone in your group about different species that inhabit that site. But I hope that sort of lays out the site kind of determines the beginning and end, which determine the route, which determine how you break that up. You don't have to have it all worked out in advance.
Great. And related to that, a couple of questions about location. One person was mentioning that she works as an educator at a landfill, and could imagine that a landfill itself might be a wonderful focal point for a quest, given all the interesting things one can find at a landfill. Are you familiar with anyone who's done a quest in a landfill?
It's definitely a great idea. There is a quest at the Hartford Recycling Center, and there they on the landfill they erected a tombstone in memory of all of the people's garbage, and so that's one of the points on the route. There's also a quest in Northern California at the Arcata Recycling Center. So really any place where there's a story to tell that most people their eyes are totally closed to, and by virtue of creating a treasure hunt and a narrative, 2 or 3 things can happen. One is you engage them with a place they've been disengaged from. Second, they might get site-specific knowledge, which helps them understand some kind of cycle, whether it's life, death, waste. And third, then they are able to carry that cycle with them. So in the future, when they see similar sites, they know how to decode them. If you think back to that slide of the kids going down to the beaver pond, once you learn how to see the signs of beaver, the chew, the lodge, the dam, and then around it you see how far they can go before they die because they can't get food anymore, and then in what's left, their browse preferences, and in the flooded pond, the snags of dead trees, in the snags, the insects and the bird nesting cavities, all that. Once you see that pattern, you'll drive on the highway and you'll be able to recognize the sequence of beaver cycle. Oh, there's an active beaver pond. Oh, there's a wet field where it's drying out, but there's no water anymore, but I see all the snags. So ideally, those patterns are exportable.
Great. And by the way, just to go, you mentioned Hartford as one example. That's Hartford, Connecticut, I assume?
That's Hartford, Vermont, at that recycling center, and the other one is Arcata, California. And there might be one as part of the Oregon Coast Quest program as well.
Great. Okay. Moving along to another site, many of us, of course, live in urban areas. And are there opportunities in an urban area, one can try and find a natural area. In Toronto, where I am here, there are ravines that cut through the city, little sort of steep little wooded valleys where quests would kind of very similar to the one in Ellie would be possible. But can you give us other examples of more urban quests?
Sure, there are tons of urban quests, but one that jumps off of the top of my head is in Minneapolis, and it's called the Quest for Power. And it looks at the falls in the city and the mills along the falls and the industrial infrastructure surrounding that, and sort of tracking the time in one location to the falls as a source of power of place and spiritual power to the native community, to being mills driving power, to rail coming in and this becoming the center of industry of a milling community, and from there you being able to see highway power, big business buildings, airplanes flying overhead. So they really took you from the water below to the sky above on the theme of all the different kinds of power you could see playing out in that location. Another one is in San Francisco, which actually starts at a pipe on the waterfront of water coming out of the ground and into the bay, and it tracks up a watershed looking at all of the ways man has positively and negatively impacted the watershed. And you look at culverts, you look at drains in parking lots, you look at girdled trees. So it's totally moving through urban industrial landscape, but on the theme of a story that you can see playing out right there.
Well, that sounds like one could also do. Almost every major older city in North America has streams that have been buried and that may or may not appear even twice along the course of their water courses. Have you heard of quests that are used to help familiarize people with the courses of those buried rivers?
Yeah, there's one actually in construction right now in Boston, which follows a buried stream and canal way past a mill site, which then was filled in, which then became a highway and is now a greenway. So there's 3 or 4 layers there that again are invisible as people walk back and forth. But an interesting app is called History Pin, and if you have a smartphone and you haven't played with it, if you can get a signal, you can geolocate where you are, and it will find historic images of those sites over different times. And the use of that tool in an urban environment is really fascinating. Also, there are neighborhoods in cities, and those neighborhoods track and change over time, reflecting changes in technology, reflecting immigration patterns. And so to walk through a neighborhood and see the remnants over time is really powerful. I was working on a quest in Krakow, Poland, and even though the war was 70 years ago, you could still see the wounds in doorways where the mezuzahs had been ripped off of buildings. And so there was a very powerful hidden clue that you could daylight in the urban environment.
Wow, powerful example. Going back, could you just repeat? Was that called the History Pen?
History Pen, PIN.
Great. I'll get you to send a reference so I can share that with folks tomorrow. But that's great. We have a couple other questions, Steve, that are really more about use of Quest in a different way. One person was asking, have you been involved or heard of others who've done this as part of teacher training?
I'm sure I've done it a lot. I've taught at Antioch New England Graduate School, and so I've run a series of questing courses there. I also did a class called Using Burial Grounds to Teach Local History for Plymouth State University. So I think it's a really viable place-based education methodology with a lot of traction. And also moving outside of the teacher community, places like Muir Woods are using it as a tool in a national park. When school groups come, they can, Muir Woods can guide those school groups through its property, keeping them on story and on track without, and actually engaged, since people are discovering rather than being told, and it doesn't require the staffing. So a lot of parks will use it that way, or a museum might use it. Museums are filled with so many objects, and at some point the visitor might get overwhelmed and they can't take any more information in. It's a way of strategically steering people to specific parts of the collection to make connections and tell a story. And that you can see how that would work in a city too. You can see lots of stuff, but going to X, Y, Z, P, D, Q, you can leave understanding this. Something about architecture, something about engineering, something about immigration.
And Steve, on that note, you mentioned history a few moments ago, and much earlier when you're walking us through that Ellie quest to find the American chestnut tree. It was obvious that the kids, in order to complete that quest, needed to use mathematics. Can you sort of speak a little bit about some of the other subject connections that are you typically engaged in a quest?
Sure. Before the writing piece, there is the research piece, and the research piece can take sort of a very brief amount of time if you're doing a quest in a day or two, or a long time if you're making a quest in 6, 8, 10 weeks. With sort of social sciences, you might work with primary sources for part of that, a primary source lesson, a secondary source lesson, an oral history lesson, a web-based research lesson. So you're teaching them how to do research, how to do history, and then the clue becomes the synthesis of what they learned through those 4 exercises. Same thing, you're making a natural science-based quest. Part of it might be you're doing an inventory. In the inventory, you're doing photography, you're doing analysis of a species, documentation of population, and then you're researching it. I want you to learn how to use a field guide. I want you to learn how to use the Encyclopedia of Life. And then the clue is a summary. So certainly in that beaver quest, we measured the distance from those chewed stumps to the pond. We measured the height at which the stumps were chewed. We measured the average width of the tree. We did a plot sort of muscle wood preference versus beech versus birch. It was clear they didn't like hemlock, they didn't like the pine. But as if you're teaching with math, you really want to preview that site 3, 4, 6 weeks ahead of time before you go there with the students and think about what mathematics is possible here. What's the match between my site and my curriculum? And then tease out with that language arts piece, what's my challenge for them in writing? Is it a paragraph? Is it a couplet? Is it 4 stanzas? In the stanzas, are they counting beat and are they holding to a rhyme scheme? So you can set the bar higher or lower in each one of those pieces of writing, research, mapping.
Well, that sounds great, and I was really impressed with some of the other examples. So really, like any good place-based education, it's really a quest becomes a really cross-curricular, integrated kind of project that the kids can both create and execute, and then I presumably evaluate how effective it is when other people try to follow their clues to get to the culminating spot, whether that's an American chestnut or a buried river.
Yeah, and in that box you get feedback because the guests sign. So every month, every quarter, every year, when you check that box, you can see how many people are using it, and they write in how they feel about it. So we have a wonderful quest on the lime pinnacle that was planted by 4th graders about a dozen years ago, and it still gets 400 to 600 sign-ins a year, and people fall in love with that place, so much so that I've read in the sign-in book proposals or a grandfather writing, I came here with my grandchildren, and I made the decision that this place is the place I want to be for the rest of my life, and I want to be with them. We're moving here. So just the students attached to the place and sharing it going public, it invites the community. And some of these places start to have a very significant role in that cultural life. Again, with this lime pinnacle, we had a terrible ice storm. A bunch of trees blew down. The trail had to be rerouted. The quest was at risk of disappearing, and a family went on it with a teacher, and a new class rewrote the quest from a different starting point to the same ending point so it could stay alive. So it's wonderful.
Fantastic. Another question for someone who's obviously very keen to start a quest with the school groups that she works with. Ask the question: if you've never done it before and you want to help the kids create a quest, would you advise that they undertake a small existing one first just to get the feel of it? Is that a good bit of?
Yeah.
Is that a good starting point?
Definitely a good starting. So if there's one nearby, you should do it. If there isn't one nearby, there's a virtual one on my website. There's one on the Valley Quest website. This one might exist in the archive, so they could go on this one to get a sense. Alternatively, in the questing book, there is a simple treasure hunt template which you can photocopy and cut out to arrange one in your building. What's most important is they need to understand the components of starting point, ending point, route, movement clue, teaching clue, and if you're going to insert a challenge, it's easier to make those better out of the experience of having been on one. It's harder to imagine them without that experience. And again, with older students, the virtual is fine. With younger students, they're much better drawing from their experience than a virtual experience. Carol, you can buy the book online. Just enter "Questing: A Guide to Creating Community Treasure Hunts," and you'll find options.
Yep, and we'll send out that information tomorrow as well. Steve, this has been fantastic. It exceeded my expectations. I knew it was going to be a great session, but you did also. It was a fabulous presentation, and I love the answers to the questions too. I think they really helped, give us a broad frame to which to really appreciate the, how wonderful learning opportunity quests are and community treasure hunts can be. So thank you very, very much.
My pleasure, and definitely you can find me on the web, and I'm happy to stay in conversation if I can be helpful in you bringing this into your work wherever it is you are.
Absolutely. And Steve, don't go away. There may well be more comments here, but I'll get you to, I'm going to just first, before I ask you to turn off the archive, let me pull up the questionnaire and ask everyone again if they wouldn't to just take a moment to fill out this questionnaire. Again, those that do will be eligible for a free one-year subscription to Green Teacher. It gives us very helpful information about the presentation. What did you like about it? What could be better? This is your first webinar, that sort of thing. It'll take but a moment to do so. And Stephen, if you can, but you don't have to. If you have other questions for Steve, we'll happily entertain them. But Steve, if I could ask you to turn off the archive, that would be great.
The archive has been turned off.